Thank you so much for being here at GVCC with us and for being at this session called Centering the Patient Voice, the Future of Cancer Research. Like I said, really appreciate all the great support and really appreciate you being here to hear from our great panelists. Just as a reminder, the session today is informational only. We're not offering medical advice. If you have any questions about your own care, you should definitely take them to your physician and to their healthcare staff. We do please ask that everyone be respectful of everyone else's lived experience. Please stay on mute unless you have something to add to the conversation. And if anyone is being inappropriate, we will ask you to leave and exit the conversation. With that, I want to thank you all again for being here. If you could say where you're from in the chat, and we can start to get the chat going a little bit. I will pass it off to our moderator, Rachel Byrd from Gryt Health. Rachel, please take it away.
Thanks for that lovely introduction, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I see that we've got folks from all over the place. I love seeing all of the where everyone's from filter in. I am based in Bozeman, Montana, so I'm joining you from a very windy day here in the mountains. So like Dan mentioned, I will be the moderator today, and I am a part of the Gryt Health team. I'm joined by my colleague, Sam Schneider, and our lovely patient expert, Kamal Gandhi, who they'll introduce themselves shortly. As a part of Gryt Health's team, I serve as a senior research coordinator in Gryt Health's research department. So our mission to empower all individuals throughout their journeys with significant diagnoses is really near and dear to my heart based on my personal experiences. In 2003, my youngest sister was diagnosed with stage 4 Wilms tumor. Her treatment and the fallout thereafter significantly shaped my childhood and the family dynamics that I experienced growing up. Since her experiences with treatment, I really knew that I wanted to pursue a career in medicine. So I ended up starting my undergraduate degree in neuroscience and completing it in neuroscience. But during that time, I lost 2 really significant people in my life to really aggressive cancer diagnoses, my paternal aunt and uncle. And those losses kind of fully shifted my life path, and it caused me to postpone my pursuit of medical school and kind of consider if I even wanted to do it in the first place. So when I was kind of deciding what I wanted to do with my life, I moved to Montana to pursue a Master of Science in Health Science with an emphasis in molecular medicine. And through that degree, I kind of learned about my love of clinical research and shifted my career focus to be more in research. And so I began my career in early 2019 in antiviral claims testing. And as one might expect, the onset of a viral pandemic really kind of threw a wrench in things, and my job kind of became a nightmare pretty quickly. I was really struggling to find purpose in what I did, and the grind of like an industry lab job really decimated where my mental health was, and it was already kind of precarious. So in mid-2020, I found myself on a journey to kind of discover who I was and to really work on my mental health through an intensive outpatient program in therapy. And through that, I was able to like process the destruction that cancer had kind of wreaked on my family. And I knew I needed to make a career change. So I found Gryt Health around this time, which was really exciting. And the universe led me serendipitously to the role I'm in now. So I joined the team in late 2020. And I'm really, really lucky to use my position to honor my sister, aunt, and uncle's experiences with their cancer diagnoses and help folks in our community every day. So with that being said, I'd love to pass over the floor to one of our community members, Kamal, to introduce herself.
So I'm Kamal Gandhi. I'm actually a professor at the University of Georgia in Athens, Georgia. I never thought I would end up being in a forum like this. I'm here because at age 46, I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, which is considered an incurable cancer. I am also very, very fortunate because I was able to get into a clinical trial when it was almost impossible to get into CAR-T trials at that time. This was in 2019. People were literally dying, but they just couldn't, they couldn't get accepted in those trials, and there were just fewer trials at that point. And now it's FDA approved. And I went through the standard care of treatments first, all chemotherapies for myeloma. I went through the stem cell transplant. I was considered low risk, but it became very obvious that I was likely high risk just because I was very stubborn. My doctor said I was a stubborn and a pain in his behind. So he said, I got something for you. And so I participated in clinical trial, and thankfully that has worked so far, and I'm very grateful for that. Because I'm a scientist and I understand the science lingo and I understand research, that's what I do for a living, although I do it as an ecologist setting, I kind of woke up and realized how important clinical trials are as part of our therapies, our treatments as cancer patients, but also bringing clinical trials early on into our treatment regimes. And it was after those clinical trials, I actually also woke up and realized that how our patient experiences have been missing to a large extent in the dialogue. We are physically treated, which is great. Yes, we need to live. And my daughter was 11 years old at that time, so I had huge reasons to live. But our mental health and what we go through, it's like our voices are lost in the process. And I couldn't really talk much about it as much as with my family and friends, because you don't want to overburden them. So joining support groups, joining Facebook groups, I actually stumbled upon the patient experience surveys and studies. So I've been a regular participant in those studies, and they've been just wonderful experiences for me overall, not only for me to share my experience, but to hear from other people. I recently met a 25-year survivor of multiple myeloma, and he was in clinical trials for the treatments that are considered standard of care now. So it was just wonderful to meet him, and he was just very positive and upbeat. So I guess this is my story. Thank you for joining us today, and I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards. And I'll pass it on to Sam.
Thanks, Kamal. It's always great to hear more about your story. So I'm Sam Schneider. I'm a senior research coordinator over here at Gryt Health. I think similar to Rachel's story and a lot of people who work in cancer research, including here at Gryt Health, my story is really rooted in a cancer diagnosis, not my own. It was my mom's. She had breast cancer throughout my childhood, and we eventually lost her to metastatic breast cancer when I was 14. Cancer runs through my family. We have a genetic mutation, so it's kind of ever present in my life. At any given moment, I might have a family member sick or going through something, and it's always been incredibly personal to me. The diagnosis of my mom and her death really blew apart my life. In high school, it kind of led to me dropping out of high school. Took me quite a long while to figure out what I wanted to do. I worked in construction, I worked in restaurants, I was a delivery driver. Eventually got my GED in my 20s, went back to school, got a chemistry degree, and got hired at Seattle Children's at the Bentown Center, which was a really exciting lab at the time, and an academic lab, the Jensen lab. We were developing some of the first CAR T-cell treatments for pediatric patients. The Bentown Center ended up growing. We became the immunotherapy integration hub, our own little department at Seattle Children's Hospital, and then eventually Seattle Children's Therapeutics, our own kind of arm of the Research Institute and Hospital, where we were working on CAR T-cell treatments from everything from blood cancers to brain tumors and solid tumors as well. It was a really exciting time, really exciting place to start my career. Though I think, and Rachel, I know you can relate, being in the lab compared to talking to patients face to face is quite a contrast. And I knew I kind of wanted to move a little closer to the patients because that's what I really cared about. And for anybody who, by the way, is going through treatment or is in a clinical trial, the people in the lab do think about you a lot more than you think. You see the same names come in, you're watching their levels, you see when they're going through a bad time or a good time, and I wanted to get closer to that. So Gryt Health really gave me that opportunity. I came over here in 2021. I've been able to work on some really exciting projects, work with really great people like Kamal to improve the quality of life of patients. And you know, having watched so many people in my personal life go through that struggle, it's really important to me to make that better in one way or another. So that's me in a nutshell, and I'll hand it back to you, Rachel, to kind of kick things off.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Kamal, for sharing a little bit more about yourselves and how we ended up here today. It's always moving to hear a little bit more from both of you about why we're here talking together. So like both Kamal and Sam alluded to, today we'll be talking a lot more about patient experience research. But before we really get into that, I want to provide just a little bit of background information on this so that we're all kind of on the same page. So if you're like me a few years ago, you might associate the phrase cancer research with labs and drugs and lots of doctor's appointments. A lot of like what Sam was talking about, people in the lab, you know, things like that. But research in the cancer space, like Kamal alluded to, is so much broader than that. In order for healthcare providers to truly treat patients and not just disease, it's important for us to learn more about the entire patient experience. And we do this through patient experience research to help patient-focused drug development, which is abbreviated PFDD. And this patient-focused drug development movement really gained momentum and is well demonstrated by reactions to the HIV and AIDS pandemic in the 80s, when the gay community, who had historically been alienated by healthcare providers and society in general, really banded together to force healthcare providers and researchers to listen to the needs that they had through protests and advocacy work. It's really inspiring to learn more about. And this momentum from this movement really continued to move the needle forward for all patients with significant diagnoses throughout the 90s and 2000s. But requirements for including patients in conversations about drug development weren't actually enacted by the FDA until the 2010s, which is crazy. So it kind of began with the creation of the Patient-Focused Drug Development Initiative in 2012, and that kind of continued with public patient-focused drug development meetings in specific disease areas beginning in 2013 that have carried on over time. In those meetings, members of the FDA actually had to listen to patient voices regarding their lived experiences with their diagnoses so that there could be more proactive legislation put into place. And in 2016, the 21st Century Cures Act was then enacted. So that not only helped accelerate drug development, but it also helped ensure that patient voice had to be a part of that drug development process. So one of the ways that we can help incorporate that patient voice is through patient experience research, which formally is defined as research on experiences that patients face within the healthcare system, ranging from treatment used to interactions with healthcare providers to day-to-day experiences living with disease. But patient experience research is more than just the formal definition. So I'd love to hear from both of our panelists on their own personal definitions of patient experience research. I'll start with Sam for his thoughts from a researcher's perspective, how he would define patient experience research.
I think the basic definition really comes back to, and this also kind of alludes to kind of one of the more shocking reasons why, well, I guess the question that comes up, why this wasn't, you know, implemented decades ago. You know, it's really, you know, you produce a product, you want to make sure, you know, your customers are getting the most out of your product, that, you know, and this is market research essentially. It's been around for decades. You know, you make a widget and you get people to tell you how much they like the widget, how they'd rather have the widget be, you know. And it's kind of shocking, especially in a field as complex as medical care, that people just didn't think to talk to the patient. You know, it was always that it was so complex that only doctors or researchers could understand, that you had to have an MD or a PhD or, you know, 20 years of experience doing this. But the reality is, you know, the person who knows it best is someone like Kamal, someone who's gone through it. And so to me, it's kind of that fundamental principle of just, you know, talking to your customer. Though it is so much more than that. It goes far, far beyond that. And I know Kamal again, what you've been involved in, it's not just market research, right? This is everything from conception to, developing the clinical trial, to making sure, your drugs are reaching the right population, and, really understanding the field that you're getting into. So it's much wider than that, but that's the basic. It's basically getting feedback from the end person, the patient, and making their quality of life better, which kind of directly leads into, you improve the quality of life, you improve their care, and which can lead to better efficacy. So it goes, straight through, and it's so I think, again, it's that basic principle. I could give you a much more complex answer, but in a nutshell, that's what it is for me.
Yeah, I think that's great that you pointed out too, that we've been doing this in marketing for years. Why is it just now becoming a concept when it comes to more patient-facing things? I think that's an excellent point. It's not as inaccessible as people think to understand what goes on in cancer treatment. And I think it's really important that it's brought to light, the holistic experience, like you said. Yeah, I'd love to hear, Kamal, how you as a patient would kind of define that patient experience research, and anything you have to add to what Sam had to say.
So the simplest term that comes to my mind are surveys. For us as a patient, we are undertaking surveys of different kinds. But there's a much, much bigger picture to that in so many different ways. It's actually a way as a patient to actually connect with the folks who are actually creating those treatments or disseminating those treatments in the first place in ways that we can't do that with our oncologist or our physicians. So it's because we're never going to talk directly with the drug company or give feedback, or it's not like they are directly soliciting feedback on any of the medication that we are taking. And so it's a roundabout way of doing it, but it's a very quantitative way of doing it, because the questions that are put together are highly structured and they're the same across all the patients. So the feedback you get can be analyzed, and then things can be changed as needed. The story that comes to my mind is with multiple myeloma, one of the medication we use is dexamethasone, which is it was a high dose steroid. And early on, when they started giving dexamethasone, maybe this was a decade or 2 decades ago, the patients, they were giving them a lot higher dose, and the patients were really complaining about it, because one of the side effects is you don't sleep. And I remember I didn't sleep for 4 months, which is a terrible place to put in. And so eventually they caught on that if you give really, really high dose, people are just not living as long. And it wasn't because they were dying of the disease, they were literally dying of lack of sleep. So I get it. Some of it is going to come out in the clinical trials, but it gives a chance, because we're the one who's experiencing all of those medications. We're the ones who are living through it. We are the ones who we are impacted, our families are impacted, our communities are. Cancer, it's like a bomb blows up if somebody gets diagnosed with cancer to a large extent. So it's not only the patients are taking part in these surveys, so to speak, but also the caregivers and the family may have a chance to have a voice that goes back to these companies. And again, I cannot underestimate, any of these studies that I have participated in, I have come out feeling better about the treatments I went through. I've met some incredible people through that process. And I have felt that my voice matters. My experience matters. I'm just not, one data point. I'm a lot more than that when I take part in these patient experience studies.
And I'd love to just zero in on something, the word you specifically that you said, which is connection. And that's really where, that's how I feel my role is, right? I'm, thinking about healthcare as like a chain, right? There's clearly a link missing between the pharmaceutical industry and the patient. And I really try to be that link, and there's not a lot of options out there for that link. And that's one reason why, patient experience research, I think, is really, coming to the forefront, because it is that link and people are starting to see on both sides of the field. And it's not just something that's good for someone like Kamal, that's good for patients. This really does benefit anybody who participates in on any angle, because, the pharmaceutical industry is learning a lot directly from patients. And this, it's kind of where capitalism meets morality. And, so often they're contradictory. And this is one place where, you listen to the patient, you're going to have better clinical trials. You're going to enroll more patients. Your patients are going to, stay on the clinical trial because they're happy on the clinical trial, because they're being listened to. So it's really where the rubber hits the road. And again, just like going back to what Kamal said, it's all about the connection and making sure that chain is strong and that it links all the way across.
I loved how you said, Kamal, that you're not just one data point, that you're a lot more than that. Because I think a lot of the times in research, and especially how we're taught as scientists, we get siloed into focusing on the data and not so much on the human aspect of things. And tapping into that can be really difficult. But patient experience research provides an opportunity for us to connect in with that more human side of research and focusing in on that important aspect of things, so that people aren't just a data point. They're the entire whole being that they are. And we're making sure that we're treating those people as opposed to their diseases. I think that's really super important. Now, we've talked a little bit about it, but there's a ton of different kinds of patient experience research opportunities. And Kamal alluded to that she's participated in a few, which is awesome. But first, Sam, could I have you walk me through a little bit more of like what patient experience research looks like, how you collect that data and stuff like that?
Yeah, so, and I kind of brought this up earlier, like just to start on a high level. So first of all, patient experience research can happen at any point throughout the patient journey and the drug development journey. It can start at conception, really exploring, figuring out what patients need, how they need it, when they need it, all the way through, when you're starting to develop your clinical trial. And then, when you're starting to administer the drug to the general public, there's more follow-up research that has to be done. So that's kind of the high level. And then, how it looks for the patient when we deliver this patient research to you is, these are surveys, these are focus groups, these are one-on-one interviews. Any way we can get the feedback. And, each of these mediums has a lot of advantages, a few disadvantages. One-on-one interviews, you get great in-depth one-on-one conversation. Surveys, you get great quantitative data. And then focus groups, you get conversations. And focus groups, honestly, are the most exciting. And Kamal, I know you've been part of a couple with us. And they're exciting because you never know where it's going to go. You think as the researcher, you have the questions, but you find out in a focus group that, you're starting to get answers to a question you didn't even know to ask in the first place. So that's one of the most fun ways to do patient experience research. And so for the patient, these can be, one-off, here's a 30-minute survey, like fill it out, and again, these are just your experiences. We're not asking you to do a bunch of research or really, we're not asking for your medical records most of the time or anything like that. It's really just you being like, I had a really crappy time, like the nurse was really mean to me, like this type of drug interaction didn't work for me, or, just sharing your experiences. It's not super complex. And, in this day and age of Zoom, you don't even have to leave your home. So it's an extremely accessible type of research that can be administered in a lot of different ways, depending on the needs of the research project and the question.
Yeah, thanks for walking us through that, Sam. And I have to agree with you. Focus groups are absolutely my favorite way to conduct patient experience research, because it's true. You really never know where the conversation is going to go. And Kamal, like you mentioned, you've participated in quite a few of these studies, had a few different interactions, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about what it's been like. I know you've said it's been pretty cathartic for you, but yeah, just curious to hear you elaborate a little bit more there.
Yeah, so I think the focus groups are my favorite as well. Obviously, there's pros and cons to every approach, right? And everybody has a different way of expressing themselves. Some are better in doing just ongoing and doing online surveys. Some folks feel more comfortable opening up. I mean, the focus groups that I've been participated in, the moderators have been really great. So my overall experience has been extremely positive. And it's a very empowering, that's what comes to mind, is it's a very empowering experience to go through, because as a it's like we handed the C card, right? Like, it's like, oh, what do I do with it? I didn't ask for it. I mean, I was perfectly healthy before I got diagnosed. I was running marathons, I was dancing, I was traveling around the world, I was, I had a full life. And so it's when everything seems so much out of control, to have a say in future drug development or treatment development or giving feedback of any sort in terms of improving the quality of our life is a very, very empowering experience for me. And I suspect people who regularly participate, that's part of the reason why I regularly participate in these studies, is partially because I feel so much better once I get off the studies, but also the bigger goal of the study is to help other people. So when I went through the clinical trial myself for CAR-T, I asked my CAR-T coordinator, I said, could I talk with other patients who have gone through it? I have no idea what to expect. And I was in phase 2 of the trial, so there were very few people recruited. And so she was like, no, obviously the HIPAA privacy laws, you can't do that. I said, okay, give my number out. They can contact me anytime. Obviously that didn't happen. But she said, there are Facebook groups. They weren't for myeloma, they were for leukemia and lymphoma. And that's where I got my information, is from other people. And it was, I didn't know what to expect. They didn't know what to expect, the medical staff, because it was so new. So, now that they're doing these patient experience surveys for people for immunotherapy, either who are considering going into immunotherapy or have gone into it, they're going to get so much more information out of it, not to mention there's a positive feedback loop through the companies to them eventually. So it's just a very important part of our cancer treatments.
Yeah, I just want to add that, not everybody can be a scientist, for one reason or another. Not everybody can participate in a clinical trial because, they might not be in that position with their cancer, but anybody can participate in patient experience research, right? Like it's
absolutely,
that's really the distinguishing factor, and anybody can have this impact.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, Sam, and great points made by Kamal as well, is that it's an opportunity to find community in places where you just aren't finding it. And that can be really challenging to navigate a diagnosis like this, to not have people that are going, like people to go to that have been through what you've been through. And so, yeah, I know, Sam, you've alluded to it a little bit, but where is this relevant? Where are we finding this patient experience research is relevant for everyone? I know we've talked a little bit about how it's really great for patients to be able to connect, but from a holistic perspective, I'd love you to just kind of walk me through how it's relevant for everybody.
Yeah, so I think Kamal did a great job talking about how, even just as a participant, it's fulfilling, right? And a lot of our participants are in stage 4 diagnoses, and this is really a really important part of their journey, is the giving back portion. And a lot of people don't have that opportunity outside of, something like patient experience research. So I think she covered, the participant angle really well. Obviously, there's a huge benefit to patients down the road, other patients who, are the next patient in line, someone who's getting diagnosed 2 years from now. All the changes, the way the clinical trials will be improved, the way drug regimens will be improved, the way that they're treated by hospital staff, the way they communicate with hospital staff, is all improved based on patient experience research. So the end user is getting benefits. The research field as a whole is getting benefits. So a lot of the research that we do is getting pushed into manuscripts and publications that's being peer reviewed. And that's going out to the world for other people, to pick up on this research, to continue our research. We do the same thing, we pick up on other people's research and continue to move the field forward. So again, as a scientific field as a whole, and again, this research isn't just more accessible, I think, as a patient. I can go back to kind of my work I did at Seattle Children's. Some of that work isn't going to be published for another 5 years. It's kind of fun to come here and get not instant gratification for the work I do, but the turnaround is a little bit quicker, right? It's not this really in-depth laboratory research that, we're waiting till we get into phase 2 to publish the data and, all this complex stuff. It's, we're talking to patients and, within a year, we can get that data out to the world and say, this is how you can, do this better, which is really exciting. And it's really exciting, especially working directly with little biotechs and stuff and seeing these changes get implemented in real time. That's something I really didn't get to experience in the more academic setting that I used to be in. And then, of course, I said this earlier, our clients, the little biotechs, the CROs, and the pharmaceutical companies are also getting benefits. So I think it's fun to be in a field where everyone wins, right? It's not an evil job where somebody, along the line is getting taken advantage of, right? Everybody is winning, from our participants to the field, to our clients, the pharmaceutical companies, the biotech companies. And that's one reason that really makes this research exciting and makes it accessible for, like I said, everybody involved, from the researchers to the companies to the patients.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's very well stated, that it really benefits everybody. And now you already did start alluding to this, but how does this research help to improve clinical operations for those smaller biotechs, for pharmaceutical companies? What does that kind of look like?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways. I mean, almost every research project I feel like I've done here has been a little bit different in a way. But like I said, some of it's that thought leadership, some of that's that, we're bringing forward the thought mechanism, or bringing forward the field. In terms of like our on the ground impacts, so, Kamal alluded to, steroid use. We've done research into steroids and how that impacts patients and how that should be administered on a clinical trial. So in terms of drug administration and how we're thinking about that, we've helped smaller biotechs design, patient-facing documentation. We've helped companies design resources, websites. It manifests in a lot of different ways. Some of it's the way that, the company is connecting with the patient. Some of it has to do with how the clinical trial is run. Again, communications. I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record here, but really anything you can think of that can be improved. If you're talking about, nursing services, that's something that can be improved. That's something that we can talk to patients and improve. If we're talking about, reimbursement services, if we're talking about clinical trial navigators, there's so many aspects. Anybody who's been on a clinical trial like Kamal knows how complex it is and how many moving pieces there are. And there isn't a single part of that mechanism that patient experience can't touch and improve on.
Every aspect of things is touched by this patient experience research. And like you mentioned, Kamal, like you have had extensive experience with, the clinical trial system through your participation in a trial. I'll apologize, my cat has decided to chime in on the conversation, but I'm curious about what experiences you've had as a patient that you feel like could be improved by research, like patient experience research. Is there anything that comes to mind?
So your question is like, what can we improve with the patient experience studies? So far I've been pretty fortunate with almost all the studies that I've participated in. I did find that some of the studies, the questions were, and I was trying to understand your question, some of the questions were a little bit harder to understand. And we have to remember that that folks who are actively going through intense cancer experience, who are participants in those studies, they may not be able to think clearly through some of those questions. So to make them as simple and straightforward as possible. And then there are other patients who are, who are beyond, or, they're sleeping well, for example, or they're not having that many side effects when they're going through treatments. So they won't have as much of a hard time. So I almost think that, and I don't know if you folks do it, to think about it in dividing up the group into cohorts. Folks who are really going through intense treatment and the cancer is, and they're really suffering from the cancer as well. They have a slightly different set of questions, or maybe really simplified than the ones that are on the other end of the spectrum, so to speak, because and I'm pretty sure that when I was going through really intense treatments, I wasn't participating in any of these studies. I mean, my head was not in the right place. And actually, because I was right in the middle of it, that would have been a perfect time in some ways to hear my voice. And so I wonder if we are missing that group of cancer patients whose voices we really need to hear.
Yeah, and I think we might touch on this later in the program. There's a huge issue of accessibility, and then that's one of them is health. And there's a number of other ones, you know, and I think, and again, I think I might be jumping ahead because I think we might talk about this a little later, but a lot of it has to do with, you know, it takes the patient to engage first. You know, I can't just go out onto the street and find, the right person to participate in our research. It takes, you know, someone to engage with us or engage in social media or engage with a nonprofit partner or collaborator of ours, which is difficult because a lot of the time they're going to be people who are, you know, maybe more in tune with healthcare or more in tune with research like Kamal, or, fitting into these certain buckets. And, you know, as a patient experience researcher, it's really important to get everyone's voice. If we're not getting a representative voice, we're not providing accurate information, and therefore the effect on, you know, if we're, say, influencing a clinical trial, it won't work for everyone. And it's a constant struggle, and we're constantly having to think of ways to engage, you know, with underserved populations, people who might be concerned about research. And I think, as someone who myself has trouble engaging sometime in the outside world, right? There's always the thought of, I'm not a typical patient, or I'm too normal of a patient, or, it's, I'm not educated enough. I'm too educated. Everybody needs to be involved in this type of research. If we're not hearing your voice, it's not getting across. And it's one of the biggest struggles we have is that question of access. And again, I think we might touch on it more. So I'll stop there and hand it back to you, Rachel. But it's a really important part of this research.
Yeah, and I think that that's an excellent segue into talking a little bit more about some of the benefits and barriers to patient experience research. And one of those is just learning about what patient experience research is. I mean, I'll speak for myself. I didn't really know a lot of this kind of research existed until I was able to find Gryt, like later in my career after I finished my education. So this wasn't something that was really talked about very much throughout my scientific education.
Right, and I was working on clinical trials for years and really had no idea. I always knew in the back of my head, I think that like somebody was talking to patients and listening to them, and something was happening. But yeah, I never really gave it thought about what that formal system looks like until I came here to Gryt, which is pretty shocking. You'd think somebody that involved in clinical trials, it would just be part of, the education and part of the experience, but it was not. And that's something I really want to change.
Yeah, for sure. And I know, Kamal, that you alluded to it a little bit when you were introducing yourself, but that you had to seek out opportunities like this. This wasn't something that was shared with you by your provider, correct?
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was thinking is, I don't know how many physicians I have seen so far, especially, when I was going through intense treatments, not single one of them ever brought up patient experience research. To me, that never existed. It just blew my mind when I stumbled upon it, and I can't remember how I stumbled upon it. I think I filled out some sort of a form or something online, and then they contacted me, and I was floored. I was like, you want to hear from me? Really? And there was an incentive associated with it. I was like, okay, $50, $100, all right, let's do it. And I was just like, wow, this is incredible that there is a system in place, and I think it's going up and up as time goes by, that gathers patient experiences and filters it down into a tangible product and gives it back to the companies so they can do a better job, or they can change whatever they need to change or tweak, and then the next set of patients benefit from it. So I never heard it from any of my providers, not a single brochure, nothing. Not even the social workers that I worked with brought it up, or the nurses.
Yeah, I think it's important to, sorry, Sam. I think it's important to acknowledge that there's that gap right now between healthcare providers and scientists and researchers that aren't in the patient experience research space to kind of understand that these opportunities are available. And that could be kind of the key to kind of accessing some of those populations like we've talked about, people who are right in the thick of treatment, people who are perhaps in underrepresented populations that may not be in areas with the best resources, things like that. It's kind of an opportunity if we are able to educate healthcare providers more to hopefully reach those important populations. Because like we've said throughout, both you, Kamal, and Sam have really noted that every voice is so important to this. I'm curious oh, sorry.
Rachel, just really quickly, I'd like to take just like a further step back, since it is kind of a big theme of this entire conference, which is, it really kind of a lot of people don't know how to take that first step out of just simply that provider relationship. Like that's what you're given when you're a cancer patient, right? Is the interaction with your provider. A lot of people never get out of that. But there's so much more to cancer care, right? There's support groups, there's resources that, can help you travel to hospital, whatever you need is out there. It's about getting that first step, and it doesn't necessarily have to be patient experience research. I think, if you're a provider, if you're anybody who has this patient interaction, giving them the first step to just a group on the outside. And, once you get involved in your first group or your first, support group or, advocacy group, it kind of bubbles out from there, right? You begin to see how these other interactions build. You get tied into more programs, more messaging about things you can get involved in. So, cancer care is so much more than just the provider relationship. And again, like I love, we have this session every year where we talk about, like survivorship care, and there's just such a big world of cancer care out there that goes so far beyond the provider. And if there's anybody out there in the audience today who has, that patient relationship, just helping them take that first step, regardless of if it has anything to do with, what I do, patient experience research, just helping them take that first step out of just simply the provider relationship is really important.
Yeah, and I think Douglas makes an excellent point in the chat that doctors are really focused and really overworked right now. I mean, this is definitely, we just came out of a session about burnout during the pandemic with healthcare professionals. And we can't deny that, yeah, doctors have a ton going on. A lot of healthcare professionals have a ton going on right now. So the last thing that we're encouraging here is adding more to your plate, but definitely encouraging that opportunity just to kind of educate yourself more about what your patients might be going through and what other resources you might be able to provide healthcare providers with a little bit more peace of mind too. I think that's just an excellent point, Douglas, that the providers are really focused on trying to help their patients. And this could just be another tool in their tool belt, hopefully, is what we'd hope to provide through this. Now, we talked a little bit about benefits of patient experience research, and there's a lot of them. We've definitely gone through a lot. I'm curious, Sam, if you could kind of talk a little bit more about the benefit of a little bit more transparency with results on studies and stuff like that.
Yeah, and this is it's always a challenge, right? So, I think as a researcher, again, I think, Kamal, you are also a researcher in a slightly different field. Maybe you can relate. Being a researcher, it's, when I come to Gryt, I'm I put my humanness first. I'm a scientist second. I think I think my official title is coordinator, and I consider myself a coordinator third. And I really want to be me, right? I want to ask questions. Sometimes I'm developing discussion guide with, my team, and I write a really elegant question, but like, Kamal said this earlier, it's not going to connect with some patients, right? It's going to be difficult to them. Maybe it's too high of a reading level, or maybe it will be interpreted in multiple different ways. So I have to cut that down. And by the time the question is done, it's a great question, but it's not what I wanted. It's this human aspect. So, getting off on a tangent. What was your original question, Rachel?
I'm just wondering if you can kind of walk through how we're able to provide a little bit more transparency with some of the results. Yeah.
So I would always want to share. So this is going, I always want to share everything with our patients. If I could say, this is what we collected, this is what's going, and when when things are peer reviewed, we can always share that. But it would be reckless of us to share, a full data set that wasn't peer reviewed, where we're, giving them information where they might make a medical decision that isn't in their best interest because, they saw it in our research, which isn't necessarily, unless it's gone through that rigorous peer reviewed process and been published, there's legal implications, right? And so like, ultimately I'd love to share everything, but we can't. But what we do strive our best to share everything we can. So, if we do publish data, we try to give that to them. If we hear from you, right, this isn't a one-way street. If we hear from you that, oh, I'm homeless right now, we're going to try to connect you with services that will at least get you off the street. If you're saying, we talk to you and you emphasize that you're having difficulty traveling to the study site for your clinical trial, we'll try to support you with resources. We try to make this where, you're not just coming in and giving us your information, giving us your experience, and then we're using that to make money or whatever. This is a two-way interaction. We want to continue to engage with you. We want to provide you with the resources. We want to show you how, what you've done, the changes that you're making in the world, because like, these aren't changes I'm making, right? When Kamal comes to us and she tells us a story and it has a really impactful quote or something that we can bring to a client that will change the way they run a clinical trial, that's not me, that's them. So yeah, I'm getting off on a tangent again, but I basically said what I wanted to say.
Yeah, no, Sam, that's super helpful. And that sheds a lot of light on, the intricacies of potentially sharing data and things like that. Because we recently actually just finished up the data collection on one of our projects, our chimeric antigen receptor T-cell therapy patient engagement project. And just as kind of an example, we were able to share our abstract that was accepted by the American Society of Hematology with our folks that participated in that engagement, because it was the peer-reviewed data that Sam was talking about. We were able to share that with all of our participants so they could see where that was going. And Kamal actually was one of those participants. I'm curious, Kamal, if you had any thoughts on like what it was like to kind of see that data.
Yeah, you folks, Gryt Health is awesome in terms of sharing the results of the studies. You're the only folks that I have worked with who does that. And I'm very grateful that you folks sent me the abstract, because that meant, again, that I'm not a data point only. I know I'm a data point in that study, but I would like to know what other people said too. And it was interesting to see that there was some sort of a consensus that came out in terms of what we thought, what our stem cell transplant, for example, as compared to our immunotherapy experience was. So, sometimes we forget that we are not alone and our experiences are not alone. So to me, it was reinforcement that, and it adds kind of a validity to our own experiences. Yeah, other people are experiencing that too. Even though every cancer is unique in every single patient, but by and large, there are some broad patterns. So it was really cool to see that.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad that it was a positive experience for you. And yeah, like Sam said, we really strive to share whatever results we can. My cat is singing a song back here, but we've talked a lot about the benefits of patient experience research, and we've talked a little bit about the challenges, but I'm curious to hear from both you, Kamal and Sam, about challenges you faced and kind of how we're working to solve those. So Kamal, I'll kind of toss it to you first about the main challenges you feel like you faced.
Challenges in terms of?
Yeah, so just kind of like anything that you kind of felt that was a little difficult about participating in patient experience research. And I know we talked about this a little bit before about how there's kind of a disconnect between sometimes what patients are able to provide and what questions are asking. So we kind of talked a little bit about that. I'm curious if there's any other any challenges you faced when you've been participating in projects like this.
So I can't remember any significant challenges I faced participating in the research. If I could participate in more of that research, I would. I work full time and I have a full career, and thankfully I've been able to maintain that in spite of all my treatments and diagnoses. And I'm a single mother on top of it. So for me, time is a big factor. And I wonder if that would be a factor in recruiting folks into these patient experience research as well. Because it does take time to either do the online surveys or doing the in-person surveys, which are a lot more, I get way more out of them. They're a lot more satisfying. That's the word that comes to mind. So there is, and the thing is, multiple myeloma, for example, is a rare blood cancer, right? There's only so many of us out there, and there are a lot of other rare cancers, and there's only so many of us that are willing to participate. As Sam was saying, how are you going to, recruitment is a problem. So, and then there's, there's only so many of us that you could bring into the room at the same time. So it shrinks, your world shrinks really rapidly, I would assume. So the time commitment is always an issue from my side.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point too, is that folks have lives on top of their diagnoses, and trying to find time to participate in stuff like this may be a really huge challenge for a lot of people. And that's something we definitely want to keep in mind when we're designing studies. Sam, from your perspective as a researcher, I know you've kind of talked a little bit about what some potential issues are, but if you could kind of walk me through some more of those, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on a lot of them briefly. From a personal level, it's that, inability to be fully me. I have to be that researcher. It's really important that we do things the way we do, that we go through an IRB, that we have these scripts. But oftentimes I want to go off script, that I want to just, I want to say something, but it's really important that we are regulated in what we do, because, there's a horrible history of research in this country and throughout the world, decades ago. And there's really good reasons why we have the limitations we do to not be human, because what if I'm a bad human, right? But it is difficult. I want to say things in a certain way. I want to approach patients in a certain way. And I do get to do that, but it is limited. It is more limited than I want it to be. But again, I agree 100% why those limitations are in place, with the institutional review board, which makes sure that we're doing things in an ethical manner. So there's that kind of personal level. And then, on a more general level, in terms of the challenges that we go through with patient experience research, Kamal hit it right on the head. It's accessibility for patients that we work with. Not everybody has the time. Not everybody trusts research. Not everybody knows about research. Not everybody, thinks that they're going to be a good research practitioner. There's a ton of barriers for patients that they have to overcome to get to the point where they're working with us. And again, from my perspective, it's, a win-win-win. Everybody's winning. It's great, but it's a lot more, when you're going through treatment, when you're already going through so much, when you don't have the time, like Kamal, and there's just so many other things happening. Why are you going to add this into the mix? Why are you going to give yourself one more burden, essentially? And I don't want to see our research as a burden, but that's what it is. It's an hour of somebody's time. Sometimes they're doubling up really deep things, experiences that were hard for them. So there's those types of challenges. And then I think with patient experience research, there's a challenge outside of, the patient, hi Milo, the patient, the patient researcher interaction on, working with pharmaceutical companies and trying to make them understand that the patient voice matters. When you were running through your intro, Rachel, you kind of touched on the timeline of patient experience research, and, really nothing was formalized till 2012. And still, there are, and we work with them, researchers and doctors and, business leaders who just don't see the value in the patient voice. They, haven't come around yet, and trying to make them understand how important this is. And the literature really does support us. Our research does create a better quality of life. Better quality of life does create better care. Better care does create better efficacy. So, the research is there, the evidence is there, but trying to convince people that this is important, that they need to implement this into their work is another challenge that we have to deal with. That that's something that Kamal doesn't see because that's outside of our interaction, but it's a constant challenge. So we do have these challenges, across the board with patients, the research ourselves, and then with our clients, the pharmaceutical, the biotech, the CROs, which are contract research organizations. And so there's a lot we're dealing with, but I think we're dealing with the hurdles pretty well. And our goal is to, especially working with patients, to make that burden as small as possible. Just be here for 1 hour. Here's the Zoom link. We're going to do all the work for you. But it's still a challenge, when you're going through everything that a cancer patient is going through just to show up. So, we do everything we can, but there's always going to be those challenges.
Yeah, and I think you make a lot of excellent points there, Sam, that talking about these experiences can be really, really difficult. It's something that even as someone who served as a caregiver for family members, it's something I couldn't talk about for a really, really long time. So being the patient going through those experiences yourself and that diagnosis yourself, some people just aren't ready to open up about it. And that's okay. But we want to provide a space for them to share that voice when they are. But we're working to try to keep engaging those people as much as we can. I'm curious if we have any questions from participants in this session. If anybody has kind of any thoughts on everything that's going on, or if they have any questions about what patient experience looks like or how you can get involved.
Oh, I see Doug. Doug has his hand up. Douglas.
So I had testicular cancer when I was 26, so 30 years ago. And I got involved on the barely internet that existed, and ended up that the Lance Armstrong Foundation, which became the Livestrong, which became Livestrong Young Adult Alliance. And it seemed like I've been involved in some of this research 20, 25 years ago. It did exist, but it wasn't like it came to you. You had to go to it. You had to be in a patient advocacy organization. You had to express an interest in it. And your local doctor wasn't going to have a clue unless your local doctor was at the university who was also an expert in the disease that you had. So typically you just have to put yourself out there and not in a how do you cure me point of view, because that doesn't usually work. But in the I've been cured, which hopefully everybody can say, which I know is not true, but if you are in that position where I now have some experience, and then you reach out to the patient advocacy organizations, then they have, there is stuff going on. I know we were part of trying to make AYA cancers better treated because the institutions didn't know how to deal with it. And subsequently, I know my daughter had breast cancer last year at the age of 24, and she was treated in UC San Francisco, and they were doing a bunch of the stuff that we had come up with to make things better for patients who were young, who needed, my daughter didn't need it, but it was like if someone needed someone to take care of their kids during chemo, or they needed the stuff going back and forth. These were things that didn't exist. They actually reached out to her and had, the fertility people called her within hours of her first appointment saying, all right, we made an appointment for you tomorrow, come in and let's get this rolling. So she already had eggs banked before chemo even started. And so it is a matter of, unfortunately, it's work if you want to do it, or at least it can be work to go out there and try to find it, but it does exist. Some cancers are better than others. Some experts are better than others, but it is not invisible. And I'm grateful for what you're doing, because you are a patient advocacy organization too. So.
Yeah, and I think, Douglas, you touched on so many great points that we talked about a little bit earlier, but you put into words really well. And that's the struggle I have, right? Like, I think trying to reach every patient is going to be harder than trying to reach every doctor and trying to explain this. But like we talked about earlier, doctors are already so overburdened. And yeah, it's really a challenge to get this information out there because, and it's so cool that you've been able to see firsthand that positive effect. That's really cool to hear.
Well, I didn't need to see it. It would have been better if she didn't have cancer, but still, it was
Yeah.
nice to actually see that it had been received and
Right.
put into practice.
Right. Yeah. So and UCSF is great, by the way. I'm glad she's getting treated there. I know that's really unfortunate, and that's a really young age. And I'm really sorry you're having to go through that. But it's just a lot of challenges.
Yeah. And may I add to that, one of the strategies I started implementing now is I undertake only those research that I think I'll be the most useful in. So, there's more and more of these patient experience research that is happening. And if I'm short on time, my way to circumvent is to take the most important ones that I think that not only would I be able to contribute to it, but perhaps there's going to be bigger outcomes coming out of it. So that is one way to ensure that I'm having the biggest impact I can down the road.
And I see Jamie had a question there in the chat. Did we answer that, Rachel?
Yeah, I'd love to kind of walk through a little bit more about getting involved in patient experience research. I know, Sam, you can probably speak to a little bit more about what we do at Gryt and how you can get involved with what Gryt Health does. And then, Kamal, I know you touched on it a little bit, but just other experiences that you've sought out and kind of how you've looked for those. It'd be awesome to kind of hear from both of you on that.
Yeah, I did. I'm part of a lot of Facebook groups. So that was how I stumbled upon it for the first time, I think. I think that's where somebody put a link in there and I hit it and I filled out a form. So for your specific cancer, there should be, like for multiple myeloma, there's like 6, 7, 8 support groups online. And so there should be, it's a great idea to become a part of it. And also, if you just do Google search and you can just say oncology surveys or cancer surveys, a whole bunch of them may show up. And then also for multiple myeloma, there are a lot of other nonprofit organizations that you can find them and go through them. So like LLS comes to mind, Leukemia Lymphoma Society, they may have specific surveys associated with them. So you kind of have to search for them. Nobody told me in person that those exist, to be honest. I had to do my own research to find the patient experience research, which is interesting.
That's a funny way to put it, Kamal. And so on our end, so we have the Gryt project, which is a registry, and you can just sign up and your name is in the registry. And as soon as we have a research project that we think you're a good fit for, we reach out to you and see if we can set something up, see if you're eligible. There's other great groups. I know there's been a little bit of conversation in the chat. Cancer Support Community is a great organization I mentioned. Dr. Platt brought up that there is a difference between patient experience research and market research. I think, they're both important to a degree, but I think you do have to be wary if you don't want to be doing market research. You do have to sometimes ask those questions and look a little deeper, because there is a difference between, the work we do here at Gryt and that market research, which again, it is important to be able to share, a product with customers and make sure that information gets out there, but it is two different types of research. So it's important to do, like Kamal was saying, your research about the research, both to find it, both to find out more about it. We can only, we're a growing team here at Gryt, so we can only offer so many research projects, every year. But, start at your, favorite advocacy organization or your support group. Community members always, have different outlets and different things that they know. There's a lot of great foundations out there. Again, just do your best to do your research, because you really want to make sure that you're getting involved something, where they're going to be secure with their data, that they're using your data for the best purposes, and that they treat you well. We do our best to compensate our participants for their time. They usually get paid a lot more than I do an hour. We do our best, like I said, to, provide you resources, to tell you where your information is going. But there's other great groups that really strive to treat their patients well as well. So just try to do your research the best you can. I know that's difficult. You can always reach out if you have questions about our research or just research in general. You can always reach out to a Gryt Health team member. My email address is just sam@grythealth.com. So you can always reach out to me. We have our Gryt Project booth open right now. You can swing by and chat with us. So, our door is always open. And if you're going somewhere else, just make sure you're doing your research.
Yeah, I think you both make excellent points that definitely seeking out those opportunities can be difficult, but super rewarding, and that there's a lot of people out there that are trying to do great work. One thing that you noted, Sam, was that we have worked a little bit with cancer support community, and they have really great resources. They're currently recruiting people for their cancer experience registry. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat for them too. So if anyone wants to take a look at that, they're looking to recruit more people to learn as much as they can about everyone's experiences. And they're a really great partner with us. And so you'd be able to learn a little bit more about another research opportunity there, in addition to our research registry through Gryt Health, which we've dropped a few links for joining in the chat. I do see that Beth has a question here. What is the best way to raise awareness of these projects for those in your life that may be very private about their medical life and don't even make you aware that they're going through things? That is an excellent question, Beth. That can be really challenging to navigate with other people. Sam, Kamal, I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts or suggestions there on that.
That's a tough one. Because if you don't know that somebody's going through cancer treatments, then you can't offer anything because you have no idea. One of the things that I do very openly now is I'm very open that I'm a cancer survivor. And I'm very open with my students in my classroom. And actually, I met an 18-year-old young woman when I was in the hospital last time. And she was a student at that time in another university. And she said, "Do you talk with your students that you have cancer? Because they would love to know about it, because everybody has been touched by cancer." And that kind of stuck with me. So now I talk openly and people come up and say, "Oh yeah, my uncle, my aunt, my mom, my dad, me, my brother, my sister," So being open and vulnerable, it's almost like when we melt as ice cubes, everybody, the other ice cubes, they all melt too at the same time. And it's a very healing, it's a very communal healing experience. So that's one way that somebody may open up and say, "Oh, I've bonded with so many people who have had a relative who has passed away from multiple myeloma, unfortunately." So that's one way, is to do that. I personally have friends who went through myeloma treatments and they never wanted to talk about it. And they were scientists just like me. Like I was doing all the research and getting into peer-reviewed literature and all over the Google. They did not want it to think about it. They didn't want to do anything about it. So they were never a participant in any of these research. And so invariably, you're going to end up having people in these studies that are highly motivated and highly vocal and are willing to talk about themselves and the experiences. And the other group that we really need to hear from, we are missing their voices. So I'm curious, maybe Sam has suggestions on how to bring those people to the table even better.
Yeah, it's a really tough question. And, one thing, I'll go back to it again, not to sound like a broken record, but just getting them to take that first step. And again, it doesn't have to do anything with research or Gryt Health or whatever, just, the first step into a community. And, you can join a Facebook community or an advocacy group and never show your face or say anything, right? You can just be a member and you can observe programs and you can be part of things, and come in at your own pace. And we've had a lot of those. We have a community here at Gryt Health, and we've had a lot of those people who have been in our community for a year or two or longer. And then finally they're like, okay, today's the day, I finally feel comfortable in this group. I feel comfortable with my cancer and myself, and they come out in their own time. But it was about taking that first step to get them into that environment. And so, yeah, and I think patient experience research in general too, it can also be very private. You can take a survey, right? And you're not telling, we actually do have people in our research projects who actually haven't told their family they have a diagnosis, but they participate in our research, and it's kind of an outlet for them to talk about their experience and stuff. And I saw Jewel had a great question in the chat about, so she has she's asking about a rare cancer type. And I think this is a great point that I didn't bring up earlier. So there are a lot of different types of prerequisites for our research. So sometimes, the eligibility, the type of people we're looking for, it's a certain type of treatment. So Kamal mentioned earlier, she was on a CAR T-cell patient experience research project. So a lot of different types of cancer types, but everyone had received CAR T. Then we have we have research projects where everyone's been on a clinical trial, but again, all different treatments and all different cancer types. And then we do have cancer type specific research where it might be all lung cancer patients or all, of a certain segment. So there's all types of eligibility. You don't, just because you have a rare cancer doesn't mean that your story doesn't matter. And if you are looking for that really cancer specific research, a great place to start is, for an advocacy group for that cancer specific type. And we work with a lot of those groups, when we are working in a rare space like multiple myeloma. We work really closely with advocacy groups because, we're not going to be able to access that population without collaboration with other professionals.
Yeah, Sam, you did a really great job of summarizing that. And both Kamal and Sam, you did a great job of addressing Beth's question as well. Just how empowering it is to just share your story for your sake, but also to empower others. And like Sam mentioned, with rare disease types, just because they are more rare doesn't mean that would preclude you from participating in studies like this. Like Sam mentioned, there's a lot of options that aren't necessarily disease specific, but maybe treatment specific or clinical trial participation specific or things like that. And like Sam mentioned, we do have a study going on right now that is more clinical trial specific. Sam, I'm curious if you could kind of walk through that and kind of like the purpose of that study and what that's helping to do.
Yeah, so we work with all different types of companies. Usually it's pharmaceutical companies and little biotech. So we got a really cool opportunity with a project sponsor of ours, Syneos Health, to do a really cool type of project with them. So patient experience research is starting to be incorporated by these really big companies that kind of, quite frankly, have the money and expertise to do the research, like the Bristol Myers Squibbs and the Pfizers of the world. But it hasn't really gotten down to the little biotech. So we partnered with Syneos Health, and we're running this right now. We actually are recruiting a very limited number of participants, again, to get the most representative group possible. And this project is ongoing, where we're working with Syneos Health, which is a contract research organization that is basically, their clients are little biotechs that can't run their own clinical trials because they're not big enough companies. And these little biotechs have never had the opportunity to do patient experience research. It's so far out of their world. They're these little companies just trying to get their drug to market. And, this is just something they don't even have time to think about. So through Syneos Health, we've been able to actually bring on demand, a little biotech in the moment has a question. We have a pre-existing patient panel we're able to bring in and answer that question in real time. And this is kind of what I was talking about, where you get those real-time results right in the moment. And it's really cool. It's a really cool project that we've been able to work with biotechs with. And it's something that's really, really close to my heart because it's a project I've worked a lot on. And anybody with clinical trial experience can participate. Again, the spots are currently pretty limited, but it's a really exciting project. It helps a lot of little biotechs. It works with a lot of different participants. And I think that kind of sums it up. I get too excited about my own projects, and then I kind of blubber on and don't make any sense, but it's the first time we've really been able to access these really small biotechs and deliver really meaningful results in the moment.
Yeah, I think that's great, Sam. And we love your passion about all of this stuff. I think that really shines through in everything that you do. And whenever you're talking about craft, I know that opportunities like this are really an opportunity to, like you said, make changes in real time, but then also engage folks that may have rare diseases or rare diagnoses that typically don't get to participate in studies like this, because a lot of broader patient experience studies or studies collecting feedback are generally in more common disease types or ones that are talked about more often. So having this opportunity to kind of engage with those folks that may have a more unique experience is really, really meaningful. And to be able to move that needle forward is really important. I know we're starting to get close to the end of things here. So I'm curious if I could just get some final thoughts from both Kamal and Sam, just kind of if you were talking to someone who had never heard of patient experience research before, what would be the kind of little sales pitch that you'd give for everybody?
The 3 minute or 1 minute elevator pitch, right? I would say try it. I would say try participating in some of these research and see if it works for you. And especially to the ones that are interested in moving the cancer research forward, right? And everybody's going to be at different parts in their cancer journey, and it really is a journey. And we also have to think about that there are more and more cancer survivors with time. And so as that population is getting bigger and bigger, which is a good thing because treatments are getting better and better, especially with immunotherapy coming in. You know, we are getting a bigger population pool, and they have this incredible chance to provide feedback and better the cancer treatments over time. It's only going to accelerate research in terms of finding cure, especially for the rare cancers. In many ways. So I would say try it and see if it works for you and what your experiences are like.
I honestly don't know if I can articulate that better than Kamal. I think, it's a really great opportunity. Like I said, not everybody's in a position where they can be a researcher or, participate on a clinical trial, but any cancer patient and caregiver, I should mention, it's not just patients. We also want to hear from caregivers, can have this impact. And it's again, I've said it so many times, but it's about taking that first step. It's about helping others take that first step. It's about talking to your doctor, and you can teach your doctor too. They may not know about the opportunities available. And if you find a great organization, you can bring it up, and they might be able to share with other people. So I think the most important message coming out of this is you're a lot more empowered than you think as a patient. You can change the way that you're treated. You can do a lot to better your care outside of just that direct provider relationship. And this is just one outlet for that. And I hope anybody here is excited about it and wants to get involved. Like I said, we've got the Gryt project. Feel free to swing by the booth or email me directly, Sam at Gryt Health. We love speaking to patients. We love working to patients. And this research does not happen without you. There can be a million me and Rachel's, and if we don't have any cancer patients, there's no reason to show up to work. So we need you. You're everything to this type of research.
And if I may add to what just Sam said, we matter. Our voices matter. Our stories matter. Our journeys matter. And what an incredible opportunity to, in some ways, bring them to life with other people who have similar stories and journeys. And we all do it together. We are very much interdependent. We're individuals and we have individual journeys, but we are very much interdependent from the time since we were born to the time since we die. So we are not alone. And the biggest tragedy that we can think about it is that we are alone. And none of us are. And so this is just another way for us to realize that we matter and we are part of this larger community that cares, that really cares.
I think maybe we should hire Kamal as our like PR rep. She can can articulate this way better than I can.
I would love to work with you folks. You folks are incredible.
I think you both make super excellent points about just the true value of patient experience research comes from the patient experience, and patients are truly the experts. Your voices are so important to us, and they are the reason that we come to work every day. And like Sam said, being able to chat with Kamal, with all of our research participants, everyone in our community, that is the best part of our day, every single day. We absolutely love what we do, and we'd love to talk with as many of you as we possibly can. So however we can get you involved in patient experience research, whether it's with us or with someone else, we're so excited to do that, because it means that we'll be moving the needle forward and making sure more voices are heard. In such a challenging time in our healthcare system, it is so important that everyone's voice is heard. And we want to be able to make that huge difference. Thank you so much to everyone who is able to join us today. If there's any more questions, we still have a few more minutes for you to drop them in the chat, so that we can kind of talk through those here. But if we have no more questions, I may toss it over to Dan to kind of close us out here and get us good to go.
Thanks, Rachel. And thank you, everyone. And thank you to our great speakers. Thank you, Kamal, for being here. Are there any other questions before we end the session? Anyone have anything that they really want us to get to, or anything that we might have missed in the chat? But again, thank you for being here.